Mr. Douglas Murray, author and journalist, to make a speech. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to Holloway and the Society and Society involved for inviting me to speak to you. It's a great pleasure to be here and see your beautiful campus. I've got an idea already from the opening applause of what most of you think. But after all, this is at the university, so we're not here to talk about propaganda, but to talk about facts and ideas and history, and I hope we can do so. The motion itself tells you everything you need to know. Are we too critical of Israel? What other country would get this crowd out tonight if we had it in the title? Syrian government just hours ago sent its own troops in and massacred people in a mosque in Syrian territory. But would you have a motion here? Well, Holloway got you all out on a pleasant Wednesday evening. Are we too critical of Syria? No. No, I'm very sure we wouldn't. Saudi government's just been pimping out its own troops, the government of Bahrain, and gunned down the people of Bahrain streets. Would you come out to discuss, are we too critical of Bahrain? Are we too critical of Saudi? No. Because international efforts led by propagandists at the moment seek only to demonize one nation in the world, and that nation is Israel. It's a huge irony that Israel is and remains the country in the Middle East, which is a country that I would submit most of you and I would want to live in that region. The only one that secures genuine freedom of worship. When I was there last few months ago, I say we've had no propaganda, in fact. When I was last there a few months ago, I wanted to visit again the Mosque of Al-Aqsa. I've been trying for some time to visit it on a visit to Israel. I can't go because Israeli troops won't allow in non-Muslims to visit at the request of Muslims who don't want non-Muslims in a Muslim site. I would submit there's almost no other country in the world whose troops stop atheists getting into a religious site at the request of a religion which many people in this hall and others would think Israel is somehow opposed to. Israel defends the religious rights of its people in a way which none of its neighbours do. It defends the rights of other minorities. It's the only country, I can tell you, in the region which you'd want to be in if you were gay. It's the only country in the region which is a safe, genuine democracy. There are attempts to have others elsewhere. Somebody said on the other side earlier about the intentional killings that go on. Now look, I would just ask you in as fair a way as possible to consider the following. Do you think that when Israel tries to defend itself, as any country coming under routine rocket barrage would, as Israel tries to defend herself, if you look at the military hardware that Israel uses, the military technology it uses, the expense of its own troops and civilians that it is willing to go through, does it seek to kill as many people as possible, or as few? I can tell you there isn't anyone who isn't a propagandist who wouldn't agree that the military technology that Israel uses, it tries desperately on every occasion to minimize any casualties. The perfect bomb for Israel is, as it always has been, a bomb which takes out the terrorists that it seeks to take out. The perfect bomb of Israel's enemies is a very different thing. It seeks to maximize casualties, as the bomb I did earlier today in Jerusalem. It seeks to kill as many people as possible, maim as many people as possible. The difference between these two things cannot be ignored. It is the difference between trying to limit human suffering and trying to maximize it. And if on a campus like this, this can't be said without jeering and heckling, then I think we've got a problem. I want to finish by saying one other thing. There is a serious problem in campuses and in this country with the rhetoric, among others, which you've heard already tonight from the other side. Professional whippers up of hatred against the state. I think that hatred will lead to genocide. Israel is a country that has been built in the wake of genocide, and forgive me for mentioning the fact, but it is very sensitive to people calling for its annihilation. It sees that from the government of Iran, not just the president and the supreme leader, but from almost every neighbouring state. It is not nothing when your neighbours say that they want to annihilate you. You have to take it seriously, and I submit Israel has the right to do so. Thank you. I think you would have to look quite hard to find another debate. I think rather proves the point I was making in my opening comments. You have to go quite hard to find a debate on international affairs where one of the people who was speaking for an audience of academics thought that it was a good idea to claim that his opponents were in the pay of a foreign government. But that was the immediate instinct of my opponent. That was the immediate instinct of my opponent here tonight, because I mentioned I'd been in Israel. Well, I just got back from Morocco yesterday morning. Perhaps I should have mentioned that and sent him into a real conspiracy tailspin. He didn't allege if I had talked about my travels in Iraq or Jordan or Lebanon or the West Bank or anywhere else. Wouldn't have alleged, I wouldn't have thought that I'm in the pay of, say, the PA or the Jordanian government or the Iraqi government or anyone else. No. But that's because you see there the fetid conspiracy mindset at work. And this is important. He referred to the fact, he said it's very difficult to say certain things about Israel. It's very difficult to say certain things about all of this. I think it's rather difficult for you. I think you have to be careful about what you say, as you showed when you referred to the murder of that family as a military operation. To get to the question, yes, obviously there's a problem for media, and I'll explain in the simplest, straightforward terms as a reporter. When you report from free democratic countries like this one and like Israel, you can say whatever you want. You really can say whatever you want. The Israeli court system has just imprisoned the former president of Israel, who was found guilty and convicted on a rape charge. He's just gone to prison. You can say, I can tell you anything you want in Israel, as you can in this country. I can say, and I do, anything I want about the Cameron Liberal Democrat coalition. I know that at no point is somebody going to come knocking at my door. I know that at no point am I going to be unable to report from Britain or unable to report from Israel. But, and I give you the example of an Arab-Israeli journalist, Khaled Abu Tomin. It's not the same in the Palestinian areas, and it's not the same across the rest of that region. Khaled Abu Tomin gave the example, just finished this recently, of a British journalist who was with him once in the West Bank, who had once in the 1980s written an article very critical of Arafat. The crowd in the cafe recognised him, somebody recognised him. The crowd started to gather, and Khaled Abu Tomin had to get the British journalist out the back door to prevent a lynching. Now, the fact is, if you are reporting from totalitarian societies and totalitarian structures, yes, you are very careful about what you say, because you don't get back in. Sometimes you don't get out. If you're reporting from free states, I tell you, it's so much easier. And at the heart of that fact is the reason.
Discrimination against Arabs in Israel. Could you tell them about that?
I'm very happy to refute that when I have time.
I would like to.
With regards to the issue of when you say that there's a general attempted bias in the favour of the Palestinians in regards to media coverage in the West, I just wonder how you can explain this point, considering that, if I remember correctly, in around 2001, that throughout the USA you found an attempt by various media organisations to try and prevent the footage from the attack in around 2001, showing Israeli troops, around 4 or 5 Israeli troops beating a child or a young man to death. Why there was an attempt to suppress that footage? Can you also explain why? Can you also explain why there is a general lack of reporting in the media about the couple of thousand Palestinian children who are in prison simply for throwing rocks at the wall, simply for throwing rocks at a wall which is being used to carve up their land?
Okay, so the question is, why is looking at
I'm not quite sure what you're referring to by the 2001 case. I can think of one particular 2001 case that is rather an important example to give. Beginning of the Intifada, there was a picture at the front of the New York Times of what was captioned to be a Palestinian student, maybe 18, 19, covered in blood, an Israeli policeman holding a baton over him and grabbing him by the arm. There was outrage across the Western world from the media again, all aimed against the brutality, what they saw as brutality of the Israeli regime. Probably a few days after, a professor from the New York University, I believe, I'm not sure, wrote to say, "That's my son. He was a Jewish student." And there was not a single correction. The photo was verified, his claim was verified, it was indeed a Jewish student. Not a single correction, not one newspaper said a thing. So I'm not quite sure what you're referring to by the 2001 case, but I think that's Zachari's point.
I'd add one other one to that, maybe, which is the Mohammed al-Dura case. The press is very, very concerned about what it runs in its conflict. First of all, because it knows what strong emotions are whipped up around the world by the release of footage. The alleged murder of Mohammed al-Dura, a small Palestinian boy, was filmed by France 2 television. It was a very long, it was one thing that spurred an intifada to occur. In a trial that finished in Paris only 2 years ago now, France 2 was shown to have messed up the footage, to have manipulated the footage, and it seems from the results of the trial in Paris that very many people died as a result of a piece of forged footage. So there are very good reasons why the press don't like to show certain things. There's just so many mistakes coming up. It's sort of hard to know where to start. But look, quickly, first of all, of course, you didn't hear from the other side that 40% of the population of Israel comes from Arab countries from which they were expelled or had to flee from the beginning of the state. You didn't hear about that.
Well, I had no chance. I wanted to answer that.
We've got selective things happening. I'll say quickly on that. First of all, Gilad Shalit was kidnapped and is in we don't even know where. We don't even know if he's still alive. We know that people who go through the legal process in Israel, that yes, people are imprisoned. Yes, as any state has the right to imprison people who threaten that state. Whether you have the right to go to another state's territory, kidnap people, and then keep them in hiding is another question. Obviously, you don't have the same problem with that. Just quickly on this thing about Gaza. Look, when Israel disengaged from Gaza, the Palestinians made a fatal error. They made the error of not taking the opportunity they had to show that they wanted to live in peace with Israel. Because the moment, and look, for those of us who want a peaceful solution to this, with a Palestinian state and an Israeli state, this is an important point to make. It's the single biggest stumbling block. When Israel, against the Israeli government, against the wishes of many of its people, traumatically for the country, forced people out of their own homes in the Gaza. They did so because they thought that if they gave the land up to the Palestinians, they would get peace, but they didn't. They got rockets. Hundreds and then thousands of rockets landing on Israeli territory. If the Palestinians in the Gaza had not fired those rockets, there would be no wall, there would be no blockade. Thank you. Of all the dastardly tricks us employees of the Zionist superstructure are capable of, I didn't know that we could also conjure marbles out of thin air. The point I made, I think, on the BBC program you're referring to, was that there is something very strange about describing the Gaza in the way that David Cameron did, given that, among other things, the standard of living among the Gazans is higher than most parts of Turkey, than in most parts of the rest of the Arab world. I think that's worth noting at the very least. And it shows the shame which you can see in any Arab country, to bring something like a decent economy to these countries, instead of running them as crime syndicate family dictatorships, as most of them are. Look, just very quickly, one of my opponents was annoyed that I sniggered when he said that he agreed that Israel had a right to exist. I sniggered because it's about the lowest thing you can say about something. If we were, say, discussing Pakistani politics, something I'm interested in, and talk might have a certain amount, Pakistan was created as a state in the same year as Israel. But say we were having a discussion tonight about Pakistani politics, you know, who are you in favour of, who you prefer, which party, which president, and say somebody said, you know, I'd like to announce, I think Pakistan has a right to exist. You'd laugh at him, you'd think, what a maniac. That's been a defunct question for decades. It doesn't help at all that you happen to think that a state has a right to exist. Oh, great, well, I agree with Pakistan's right to exist. Excellent, that gets us a long way forward in the discussion. And so I don't know why people do it this way. The reason they do it, as the gentleman from the other side showed, was that, again and again, we don't even have rockets now. We have so-called rockets. So-called rockets, a particular new type of rocket that doesn't have the same effect, doesn't kill you if it lands on your head, doesn't cause the casualties they cause. Look, the reason why you are hearing such poor stuff from the other side is the following. They are not telling you the basic fact about what is happening on the ground. We're told that the Israeli army likes to, in Operation Cast Lead, bomb schools and hospitals. Do you think, let me know, no, you may have this all. Why do you think it is that the Israelis went and bombed hospitals and schools, which on a couple of occasions, yes, missiles landed on them? Why do you think that was? There was a reason. It wasn't just a Jewish bloodlust for blowing up hospitals, okay? It was because the Hamas, which have been ruling the Gaza as a dictatorship for the last few years and still have cancelled the next elections, and nobody on the outside has mentioned that the Hamas will not have any more elections. They won't do the PA's elections in July. They said they're not interested in that. They're a one-vote, one party, which murdered the other Palestinian party's members in the Gaza. You have to regard this as being important. If a state is being run by a terrorist group and murders the other people in the state, shoots them in the back and throws them off buildings, if they're Fatah Palestinian members, that is of some significance. And yes, the Hamas have a crucially different role in the world than the Israeli government or most democratic governments. Because the Israeli government spent, as this government would in this country if rockets were landing, not so-called rockets were landing on a regular basis, they would build bunkers for people to be in. They would build early warning systems for missiles. They would do all of these things. The difference between a good, legitimate, democratic government and the Hamas is that the Hamas uses schools as arms dumps. They do what the Hezbollah did in Lebanon. I saw it myself. They build an arms dump and then they put a school on the top of it. Do you honestly not know this? Do you not see it? Finally.
Show us.
Finally.
Show us, man.
Yeah, then
You have to go back to John Game, the UN guy.
First of all, Hamas established democratic elections. So Israel went to war with a democratic elected government. I'll come back to the latter point. Secondly, how would you justify Israeli ultra-Orthodox Jewish settlements inside the occupied territories of the West Bank?
Firstly, your question on the Hamas. Oh, look, this is worth focusing on for a second because Muslim Brotherhood, obviously, controls Hamas as a wing, have big intentions in the region. So it's worth looking at what they have done so far, where they have got power. We may have a different standard of what constitutes a legitimate democratic government. I don't think that seizing power after an election in a coup where you kill your political opponents, murder them, and then never have another election is a democracy. I just don't think it is. I don't think it counts. One vote once doesn't count in my mind. The Hamas are, I have to say this, the biggest stumbling block of peace between the two parties. Because there are now three parties. And you have the possibility of a three-state solution, which I think is a very unhappy result, where you have the Palestinian Authority governing the West Bank, the State of Israel, and then a Hamas state in the Gaza. I think that's a very bad outcome. I think it's principally a terrible outcome for the people, the Palestinian people. I think secondarily it's a terrible outcome for Israel because it doesn't have a negotiating partner in that part of the world. On the settlements issue, look, there's a lot of difference of opinion on this, but I'll express mine. I don't want any more settlements. I think that they should roll back a number, quite a lot. I think that the final settlement between Israel and the Palestinian peoples in the West Bank will not be the 1967 borders. I think it will be something which allows some settlements to remain, some of the large ones. There will be a compromise on others. Effectively, most people know this is the future of it. There's the people who dream of 67 borders and things. It's not going to happen. But there is an additional thing on this which is worth mentioning. A gentleman referred to it in the question earlier. We should ask ourselves why it is that it is pretty much being decided by the outside world that if the Palestinian state does come into existence, as we hope it does, in the West Bank, that it will be free of Jews. This is a serious question we have to ask the region. Why is it that an Israeli family couldn't continue to live in their house in a Palestinian-run state? And when you consider that, you get to the root of part of this problem.
I would just like to point out the democratic nature of Hamas, which is so often propagated as a means to apologise for their actions. If 51% of this room voted to exterminate the other 49%, I would not consider that decision legitimate. I would not consider the reason to talk to 51% and hope to pursue a peaceful resolution or anything. The point is democracy is about accountability, it's about liberalism, it's about freedom. As Mr. Murray pointed out, Hamas murdered its political opponents as soon as it seized power in Gaza. It has continued to intimidate people who don't fall in line with its ideology since, and it tortures and murders its own citizens regularly. It also places them in grave danger by firing from schools, mosques, hospitals, as we've discussed. There can be no doubt about this. The idea of democracy in Gaza is ludicrous, and it's very problematic to continue referring to it. In order to have peace, there has to be freedom from Gaza.
Thank you. Look, my observation would be the following. Anyone who says to you this is simple is a liar. It's not going to be simple, but it is achievable. And I would put it in the following way. In our lifetime, we will be able to see, perhaps even in the next 10 years, we'll be able to see what I think the us in the panel are united in wanting, which is, as I say, the creation of a legitimate Palestinian state. Now, most, I think, if not all, there are some. I agree that every single democracy there's some whack jobs. No doubt about it. You can always find one in America, you can always find one in Britain, you can always find one in Israel. But most of the mainstream, the whole of the mainstream of Israeli politics recognizes that at some point in the near future a Palestinian state has to be encouraged and allowed to go ahead. Now, the problem for Israel, the problem for peace, is the following. They have a serious problem with finding a legitimate negotiating partner. And since the so-called election of Hamas, this has become a lot harder. Hamas, nobody's mentioned it yet, but it should be mentioned. Hamas, in its founding charter, is dedicated to the annihilation of the Jewish state. It is very, very hard to talk niceties with people who want to annihilate you. Very, very hard. Very hard to talk particular border issues or taxation issues or local council business if somebody's big picture desire is the annihilation of your peoples. So, there is a big obstacle to peace, a very big obstacle, and it is the fact that a very large number of Palestinians and a certain proportion of their leadership, most obviously the Hamas, cannot allow this Palestinian state to go ahead because they have to allow the Jewish state to exist alongside it. And they cannot make that leap. It is a tragedy. I have to tell you, it is a tragedy because what is possible is so within reach. But as long as the Palestinians have Hamas, a terrorist organization, claiming to represent a group of people, the Israelis can never sit down with them. And so, as I say, the will, I believe, on Israel's side is there. And they pretty much know what the final resolution of this conflict would look like. But we have to ask whether the same willingness sits on the side of the Palestinians. And I think the answer there is far more troubling. I'm so sorry to be very, very brief. The Oslo didn't happen that way. At Oslo, Arafat, who had been a terrorist who had been trying to annihilate, after all, the Jewish state for his whole adult life, Arafat was offered things that I think now are not going to be on the table, sadly. But at Oslo, he was offered, among other things, he was offered 98% of what he wanted. And among other things, he was offered a division of Jerusalem, which I think is not a desirable thing. But he was offered all of this. What did Arafat do? He did what Arafat always did. He walked away. He missed the opportunity. This is a total misreading of history. And as for this issue of expulsion, which state in the world in recent decades has been the one who has expelled most Palestinians? Anyone know? Kuwait. Kuwait. After the 1990 invasion by Iraq, there was only one authority government in the world stupid enough to back Saddam Hussein, and that was, of course, Yasser Arafat, who never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And as a result, when the Kuwaiti government got its state back, it expelled every Palestinian from Kuwaiti territory. Now, pardon me, but if we're hearing 6 decades on all of this stuff about the right to return to the 1940s, why not them? There's a reason. Because when Israel does it, it interests certain people. As I said, I hope I didn't rant and rave tonight. I lived by the other side. I tried not to. But let me just, without ranting or raving, answer some of the points that came up. The Louis Theroux program was answered. I don't know, I just don't think that's a useful guide to things. The last Louis Theroux program I saw was about Paul Daniels. He came out in a pretty bad light, but I don't think that means that all magicians or all Brits are represented by Paul Daniels in it. I mean, come on, let's at least talk about the reality and the history that's going on. You just heard from the previous speaker, a classic example, by the way, of what I'm going to attribute good motives to him. I'm going to be benevolent and assume that he's speaking without any ill intent. But what you've just heard then, in that case, is a classic example of bad history from somebody who's had to live in a totalitarian society. I was in Egypt a few months back, and I saw a great example of this. When there's the 8th of October city, and there's an 8th of October road, and I said to an Egyptian friend, "What's all this 8th of October business going on?" He said, in a very, very educated guy, "Oh, that's because of our victory over the Israelis." I went, "Your what?" "Yeah, it's our victory over the Israelis." "When was that?" I had to say, no, the Israelis beat Egypt." "Really? I didn't know that." The fact is that if you live in a society which controls what you think, you can come out with real crap. Quickly, Sri Lanka hasn't come up tonight, but I would love to know if they're doing something here, or anyone else is doing something about we're too critical or not critical enough of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, when it put down its terrorist problem with Tamil tigers more than a year ago, massacred tens of thousands of people. The press were kept out. The press didn't vote out it, they just stayed away. Well, that's how some states operate. It's not how Israel operates. But you do, again, have to ask yourself, why this constant focus on what Israel does in this? The fact is that Israel, the land that Israel is on, is a too much promised land. It's been promised by too many, I believe, fake deities, too many people through fake religious books. And the fact is, if you read the history of that land, it's a terrible, terrible thing. Too many people think that God tells them to settle there. And so there's a God problem, a God congestion problem in the area. Look, I think the best way this is sorted out is to take God out of it, take out divine claims, because they're all counter to each other. We've heard a lot about history, or a bit of it anyway. And we can always dispute history. But let's just look for a second about the future. The future, as I see it, will be, as I've said repeatedly, the Palestinian state will be created, and I hope it is. And I hope that it has international support. But it can, I repeat, only be created if it recognizes that an Israeli state with a Jewish identity also exists alongside it. That remains now, as it has been for years, the biggest stumbling block. And one quick thing, thank you. The reference that has been made repeatedly to the international law. I mean, now I just don't like this view of history and the view of the future. That instead of armies and so on, we'll just parade international lawyers to sort out all problems. I mean, it works up to a point, But there are also things that are extra-legal problems that lawyers can't deal with. There are problems when the international security is threatened, when lawyers aren't the answer, and the international community, very quickly, and the UN is a reason for Israel to feel very concerned. Because since 1975, its policy has been anti the existence of the state. That is a problem, and that is one of the things that's going to stop.
Thank you ever so much, Mr.
Can I have your name? Sorry, I forgot your name. The gentleman in red and pink.
Mr. Murray.
Mr. Murray. Excellent. I must say, I quite admire your ability to recall facts about the lives of the people in Gaza. I've got a newspaper in front of me, and it's dated 16th January 2011. It's a publication from the UN. It states that 50% of all the people in Gaza are actually unemployed. 4 out of 5 people rely on the food aids. 75% of people lack the basic necessity of food. And 95% of all the businesses that were opened by the people in Gaza are actually closed by the Israeli government. Now, this is a UN fact. Now, I'm talking about facts. It was actually a bit okay. The question is that I wonder where you actually get your facts, because what you say and what I read here does not make sense.
Where do you get your facts from?
Very, very good. I get them right. I think I urge you to get them, which is from a number of sources. First of all, read as much history as you can. Don't read biased one-sided accounts of history from any side. From any
No, where did you get them from?
The Sun. First of all, I get them from reading a lot of history. Secondly, from reading a lot of current affairs, and thirdly, by travelling a lot and by speaking with a lot of people as a journalist. Now look, the thing you just read from, is that the Palestine?
It doesn't matter where it's from. The figures is from the UN.
It's an interesting source. Is it the Palestine?
Figures are from the
Is it the Palestine?
It doesn't matter where it's from. It could be from my head. The
Can you
figures
just tell
are
me, is
from
it
the UN.
Palestine?
Now tell me. Tell me.
We're going to move on to the next person.
But if it's the Palestine Telegraph, this is interesting.
If the gentleman doesn't want to tell you what his source is,
I will assume that it is the source which he doesn't want to tell you.
Ask the question. Please go.
It's regarding what the story started with about you quoted Ahmadinejad and about the annihilation of Israel. Ahmadinejad talks about the annihilation of Israel, whereas would you not think that the actual policies of Israel over the last number of decades have actually been targeted at annihilating the Palestinian community? So, for example, settlement expansion, land grab, the siege on Gaza, the checkpoints which prevent people from getting jobs, freedom of movement, restricting education, the Palestinian refugee situation, which Lamy mentioned. Is that not actual annihilation? And yet, I've heard you a number of times quote Ahmadinejad and talk about Iran and thinking about Hamas, yet you seem to have an allergy to actual facts on the ground.
I can.
I'll tie into that, but the other thing that you mentioned in your opening statements, both of these are very ironic points because you talked about propaganda.
Okay, can we let him answer them one at a time?
Well, you can do them both at once.
No, because there are lots of people who want to ask questions. We're not getting enough
It's a very
time.
brief point.
So can you please, Mr. Murray, please.
It's about propaganda. Just a quick point on propaganda.
Okay, no, sorry, we can't let that go. We're just wasting time for everyone else. I'm really sorry. We're not going to do things based on that. What you are doing is disrespectful to all the other students who want to hear the questions. You're wasting everyone's time. Please, Mr. Murray.
Thank you. I hope we can speak afterwards and I'll answer the second part then, in private or whatever. The question on Iran, it's a straightforward one. If the Iranian, as I say, President, Supreme Leader and others say they want to annihilate the state of Israel...
They never said that, Douglas.
Okay, please,
basically...
let the speaker finish. It's not going to be very disrespectful.
And there's always someone who pretends they don't say what comes out of their mouths. Wipe from the face of time, whatever your particular transliteration you want to
you have sufficient knowledge of English. I mean, you're an English speaker, you can understand.
Your fellow students who want to listen to this answer,
is the following. is that whilst pursuing nuclear weaponry, that is certainly something which Israel should be concerned about. Secondly, on the issue, no, I don't think it's anything like an annihilation here. Look, it's referred already that Israel is a nuclear state, okay? Mordechai Benunu, the whistleblower, went to prison for revealing this many decades ago, as this country imprisons people who release our secrets and our intelligence information. Now look, let's just be real about this. If Israel wanted to annihilate the Palestinian people, it could, but it doesn't. It doesn't. It's simply a fact on the ground. Go to the West Bank, go to Israel, speak to Palestinians in Israel. Is it annihilating them? Or is it giving them all the rights of every other citizen?
What's
It's
the
the
Jewish
latter.
oath of loyalty? What is the Jewish oath of loyalty then?
This is
How's
a
that freedom?
fantasy concept that Israel is engaged in annihilation. And by the way, it is said for a particular reason. A very particular reason. I have to highlight this very quickly. It is always said because the desire of people in Europe and elsewhere at the moment seems to be lending towards the idea that now the Jews are doing it. Now the Jews are doing genocide. It's such an attractive thing for Europeans to argue. You see, even the Jews can do genocide. No, this is a fantasy.
Mr. Murray, you said Israel, we call it military occupiers, have a democracy. Well, this democracy has come with a cost. 60 years of occupation and the cost of my grandfathers in South Lebanon. And this democracy has brought these, just to mention a few, and I have the source for you if you are really interested into facts, by United Nations and a few organizations in the United States. So I'll bring it to you now. One of them is that more than 1.1 million people, which is 75% of Gaza population, lack food according to the United Nations. And 10% of Gaza water now meets the international standards for consumption. And also Israel allows entry for only 2.2 million liters each week of fuel, half of the minimum level required by the civilian in Gaza. Now how would you call that a democratic state? I don't call them. I call them military occupiers.
Okay, good. Let me ask
You were laughing at the data. I have the data for you here.
Firstly, I think even the UN's own data, which you can look back at like later, shows that living standards in Gaza are higher than in many other parts of the region. Secondly, let's just get back to the facts. Why is it that there are checkpoints into and out of Gaza? Why is it that Israel is sending in truck after truck of food, and why isn't there free flow? Because, just to tread back over it again, every time there is a free flow from Gaza into Israel, Israel gets suicide bombers. So if there were no suicide bombers coming in, then the aid and so on could be better. It would be trade, not aid. And then secondly, a very, very important point. The gentleman who just spoke said 60 years of occupation. Is this, we ask ourselves what I think most of us on the panel want, which is a carving out a Palestinian state within this? No. 60 years of occupation. You mean the whole of Israel is an occupation, do you not?
The whole of Palestine.
Yeah. Do you not think that?
The whole of Palestine is an occupation.
Yeah. You believe, in other words, there is no Jewish state in the right.
No, Jews can live in Palestine, but Israel, they invaded Palestine. That's what they did.
Illegal.
And South Lebanon.